All right, let's dive into this. It's Tarsons Products Ltd, Q2 FY25. And you've given me a lot to work with here.
Oh, good.
We've got the official company announcements, we've got their investor presentation, and some good market analysis, too.
Yeah, should be fun.
So it's not just, numbers in a vacuum. We can really see where they fit,
Much big picture.
in the bigger picture, yeah. And right out of the gate, that press release, 21% year-over-year standalone revenue growth in Q2, that just jumps out at you.
Yeah, it does.
Especially when you see their own commentary talking about a, quote, subdued market.
Yeah, makes you wonder what they're doing right.
Yeah, definitely outperforming. But then you see the EBITDA margin went down to 29.3% from 38.3% last year. That's a pretty big drop.
And that's where that investor presentation is helpful, because it clarifies that part of that is due to, remember, they acquired Nerba,
Right.
the European labware distributor, in Q4 of last year. So now their numbers are all rolled up together.
And Nerby's primarily a trading entity, right?
Yeah, so they're mostly buying and reselling, whereas Tarsons is, the manufacturer.
So you're going to have that margin difference just built in.
Exactly. Trading businesses, lower margins, so that blending is going to pull the overall number down.
So not necessarily a bad sign for Tarsons' core business then.
Right. It's more about the structure of the company now. But there's another thing in there. They had some damaged machinery during transit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And instead of repairing it, they're replacing it outright, which leads to that 6.3 crore provision this quarter.
Yeah. Definitely hits the bottom line, though. They did file an insurance claim, so
Fingers crossed on that one.
yeah, hopefully that comes through. But let's get back to that revenue growth. 21%, that's got to be good, right?
It is, especially when you see it's both domestic and international, so they're not reliant on just one market.
Not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And this is where that market analysis you gave me comes in. It's predicting a 16% CAGR for the whole Indian labware market from 2020 to 2025.
And they're exceeding that they're out in front.
Yeah, likely thanks to that brand recognition and their focus on high-quality products.
It's interesting, though, because we've got that management commentary talking about the subdued market, but then they also say there are, quote, indications of a resurgence with more inquiries and orders coming in.
Yeah, so short-term may be a little shaky, but long-term they seem optimistic.
That's the sense I get. And it seems like that investor presentation supports that they point to some pretty fundamental trends, like urbanization, rising chronic diseases, more pharma R&D being outsourced to India.
Yeah, those aren't things that are just going to disappear overnight.
Right. It's a bigger picture than just, one quarter's results.
Exactly. And then you look at their financials, all that investment in property, plant, and equipment, almost 670 crores just in the first half of this fiscal year.
Wow. So
Yeah.
they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Definitely. And the presentation lays out how they're spending it. New fulfillment center in Amta, West Bengal, with in-house sterilization. That's a big deal for a company like this.
So they're scaling up, getting ready for that growth they're predicting.
Yeah, plus they're expanding their product lines at a new facility in Panchla.
Now, I did notice there's a sizable loan to a subsidiary on the balance sheet. Any idea what that's about?
It's probably related to Nurbebe. The notes mention a loan to their Singapore subsidiary that was used for the acquisition.
So pretty standard stuff then.
Yeah, parent companies often finance acquisitions that way, but it's a good reminder when you're looking at these financials, you can't just take the numbers at face value.
You need the context.
Exactly. The why behind the what. Like, we see other financial liabilities have increased, but without more detail, it's hard to know what that really means.
So we need more clues, like we're detectives.
I like that. But big picture, this seems like a company that's really betting on its future.
They're not shying away from growth.
Definitely not. And that's the question for anyone listening. Is this a bet you'd be willing to make? We've seen the internal workings, but to really judge, we need to understand the competition. Who are they up against? How do they compare?
That's the next piece of the puzzle. All right, we'll dig into that.
Looking forward to it.
So it's like, we know their game plan, but we haven't scouted the other team yet.
Right. And speaking of competition, that investor presentation actually points to a pretty interesting trend. The shift from glassware to plasticware in India.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they list out a bunch of reasons why plasticware is safer, more durable, and cheaper, which is a big deal in a price-sensitive market like India.
Makes sense. And of course, less contamination risk, which has got to be huge in a lab.
Huge. So Tarsons is riding that wave, but they're not just making any old plasticware.
Yeah.
They're really emphasizing quality and innovation.
So they're not just trying to be the cheapest option out there.
No, they're going for that higher standard, and that's where you see their expansion into new product categories, things like cell culture and robotic-handled
Oh,
consumables.
right. Those were in the presentation.
Yeah, those are high-growth areas catering to those more advanced scientific needs.
So they're thinking ahead, not just reacting to what's happening now.
Exactly, positioning themselves for the future of this industry. And remember that subdued market we talked about.
Yeah, they weren't exactly thrilled with the current state of things.
Right. But they also hinted at a possible resurgence based on inquiries and orders picking up.
Okay, so short term, maybe a little rocky, but long term, they see potential.
That's the message they're sending. And they point to some long-term drivers to back that up: urbanization, the rise in chronic diseases, more pharma R&D coming to India.
Those are pretty big trends, not just, a fad that's going to disappear.
Exactly. They're tied to those larger shifts, societal and economic.
Which makes this whole thing so interesting to me. We're not just looking at one company. It's like a window into all these bigger forces at play.
I agree. And those forces can cut both ways for Tarsons, creating opportunities, but also challenges.
Speaking of challenges, I got to say that presentation is pretty optimistic,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really dive into the competitive landscape all that much.
That's the big missing piece here. They tell us how great they are, but we don't know how that stacks up against their rivals.
Yeah, are there other companies innovating just as fast?
Or offering similar quality at a lower price?
Right. Like we've seen their moves, but we don't know what the other players are doing.
Exactly. So to really judge their prospects, we need to understand that broader competition.
Yeah, they do talk about expanding into overseas markets, targeting emerging markets with their own brand, and developed markets with ODM sales.
That's a smart two-pronged approach in emerging markets, where brand is everything. They leverage what they've already built.
And in developed markets where it's probably tougher to break in.
Right. They use ODM partnering with established players, basically being the manufacturer behind the scenes.
So they can gain market share without having to start from scratch.
Exactly. Shows they can adapt. But even the best strategy can fall apart if you don't execute it well.
And that's where risk comes in. They've got these big growth plans, but what could go wrong?
Well, for starters, expanding manufacturing like they are those new facilities, that takes a lot of upfront investment.
So it could hurt their profitability in the short term.
Exactly. And there's always the risk that they overestimate demand. What if those facilities end up sitting half empty?
Ouch, that wouldn't be good for their return on investment.
Not at all. And then there's the Nerby acquisition. Getting into Europe is great, but integrating a new company is never easy.
All those cultural differences, logistics, potential clashes in management styles.
It can definitely derail things if it's not handled well.
And let's not forget the whole macroeconomic environment. India's economy is growing, but there's always inflation, currency fluctuations, political uncertainty.
All those external factors can throw a wrench in the works no matter how good your plans are.
So it's a balancing act, managing internal growth, dealing with external pressures, staying ahead of the competition.
Lots of moving parts.
And this is where I turn it over to the listener. What jumps out at you from all this? Are you buying into Tarson's story, or are there red flags that make you hesitant?
That's what I love about these deep dives. We're not giving you the answer. We're giving you the tools to figure it out yourself.
Exactly. So dig deeper. What information are we missing here? What questions would you ask Tarson's management if you had the chance?
For example, that presentation doesn't really talk about their sustainability practices. Are they using recycled materials, exploring alternative packaging?
Good point. That's something a lot of investors care about these days.
Definitely. And what about their board composition? Their commitment to diversity and inclusion? Those things matter too.
They can impact a company's culture, its long-term success.
It's all about connecting the dots, looking beyond just the numbers, getting the full picture before you make any decisions.
And sometimes that means asking the tough questions, even if the answers aren't easy to find.
Absolutely. The more informed you are, the better prepared you'll be to navigate this whole investing world.
Okay, so we've talked about their financials, their strategy, the market they're in, but what about their management team?
What are you curious about?
Well, they highlight their experience in the presentation, but I want to know, what's their track record? How have they dealt with tough situations in the past?
And what's their long-term vision for the company?
Right, because ultimately their leadership is going to shape where Tarsons goes from here.
Speaking of the future, they do touch on those plans to target developed markets with ODM sales, partnering with those established players.
Which is interesting, but it also comes with its own risks.
For sure, they'll need to manage those relationships carefully. Make sure they're not compromising on quality, even when they're manufacturing for someone else.
It's a tough balance, and they've got to be careful about intellectual property, too.
Big time. They need to protect their designs, their innovations, even when they're working with outside partners.
And as they expand globally, they're going to run into all sorts of different regulations.
They might have to adapt their processes to meet those standards.
It gets complicated fast.
Yeah.
It's not just about what they're doing internally, it's about that whole global contact.
Exactly. The labware industry is global, and now they're playing on that bigger stage.
And that's a question for our listener. How is Tarsons' performance going to impact that global market? Will they shake things up?
Yeah.
Will they push the boundaries of innovation?
That's what we'll have to wait and see. But by understanding their strengths, their strategies, the challenges they face, you'll be better equipped to follow along and make your own judgments.
We've given you the map and compass. Now it's time to explore.
And remember, exploration is rarely a straight line. There are going to be twists and turns, unexpected obstacles, maybe even some hidden treasures along the way.
Exactly. That's what makes it exciting.
Yeah.
So listener, keep an open mind. Ask those questions. Don't take anything for granted.
And most importantly, enjoy the process of discovery.
It's like we've zoomed in and zoomed out on Tarsons. Looked at the details and the big picture.
Yeah, we've definitely covered a lot from their specific numbers to the whole industry landscape, but sometimes the most interesting stuff comes from those unexpected connections.
Oh, absolutely. Like, remember that damaged machinery we talked about?
Yeah, seemed like a small thing.
Right. But it could have a bigger impact than just this quarter.
What if those components had been crucial for a new product launch or a big international order?
It really highlights the importance of, risk management, having a plan B.
And it raises questions about their manufacturing process, too. Is that damage preventable? Are there better quality control measures they could put in place?
So, like, even a small detail can tell you something about how they operate.
Exactly. Now, another thing that I think needs more digging into is that expansion into overseas markets. The presentation mentions it, but it's pretty vague.
Right. They say emerging markets with branded sales, developed markets with ODM. But which countries specifically?
And what kind of regulatory hurdles are they going to face?
And how do they adapt their marketing to different cultures? That's huge when you go global.
It's like they've given us the outline of the map, but we need to fill in the details.
Exactly. And those details could reveal some hidden risks.
Like some emerging markets might have faster growth, but also more political instability or economic problems.
While developed markets might be more stable, but also way more competitive.
Right, so they might have to spend a ton on marketing and distribution.
To trade off, no easy answers.
Nope. And that's where you come in, listener. We've given you the framework, but it's up to you to do that deep dive, explore those unanswered questions, come to your own conclusions.
And remember, the best insights often come from connecting those seemingly unrelated dots.
Like we talked about that loan to their subsidiary, probably for the Nerdy acquisition, but how does that affect their overall financial situation?
Does it limit their ability to make other acquisitions or invest in new products? Those are things an investor would want to know.
And don't forget, Tarsons is a public company, so it's not just about meeting their own goals. They have to meet the market's expectations, too.
How's the market going to react to this latest performance, strong revenue growth, but that dip in EBITDA margin?
Will investors see the long-term potential, or will they focus on the short-term ups and downs?
And how's Tarsons management going to address those concerns, communicate their strategy?
All those things can affect their stock price, their ability to raise money.
So even with all this information, the analysis never really ends. There are always more questions, more angles to explore.
That's what makes investing so fascinating. It's a constant process of learning, adapting, refining your understanding.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into Tarsons Products Ltd, we encourage you to keep that process going. Don't just take our word for it. Challenge it, question it, make it your own.
Because the most valuable insights are the ones you discover yourself.
And who knows, maybe someday you'll be sharing your own WN deep dive into Tarsons, uncovering even more layers of this company and its journey in this exciting world of labware. Thanks for joining us.